Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Arden, and today we're talking about Invincible, the Amazon Prime series. So, I saw a little clip of this just going by on Prime when this was first being advertised and was blown away by the animation. For those that don't know, Invincible was an Image comic series by Robert Kirkman, Cory Walker, and later Ryan Ottley, and was this amazing run of completely independent superhero comics. Independent in the sense that none of these characters are owned by either of the big two. It's a bit of a pastiche on existing stuff from Marvel and DC, but largely just this take on superheroes that works really well as a fun series of how do we even describe it? Like superhero comics, but with this whole level of realism kind of plastered around it. And I shouldn't actually get into it too much if you haven't actually checked out the show yet and you're watching this stream post haste. I do strongly recommend you watch at least the first episode before watching this stream or really learning too much about the series if you haven't read the books before or don't really know much about Invincible. It's a very fun series, but I feel the best way to expose someone to it. So, for example, if you are an existing viewer of the show and are a fan in some form or another and want to share it with your friends, I really just kind of recommend you let them go into episode 1 blind and let them experience it for themselves, because it gives a good idea of what to expect from there on out and what to go from here. Because it is animated, and I do love the animation, but make no mistake, this is not a show for kids. It is brutal and brilliant. The best part about it, and I've often heard what, in the years long before this show was ever a thing or even rumored to be in development, people talk about Invincible with reverence. And we've never actually covered this particular comic book series before on Comic Island. Personally, and I can't really speak for Joey on this count, but personally I've shied away from it a bit because it is so vast and long and epic. Much like The Walking Dead, Robert Kirkman's other big series that he's best known for, Invincible is very long running and kind of part of this massive, sprawling story. One which I'm not necessarily against. As I've been kind of looking back over the series, the comic book series, as I've been watching this show, I really have come to appreciate all the things it kind of did and the full fleshed out universe it built around these characters. It's a really, truly strong and epic run of episodes so far. I love the voice cast, and the animation just sort of brings to life much of the artwork by Ryan Ottley and Cory Walker in a beautiful and brilliant way. So this is a very long-winded way of saying that I love this series, and Amazon, interestingly, is kind of taken on a very cool niche in the world of streaming and especially superheroes. Between this and The Boys, they've really kind of almost created a counterculture of shows or something like that. That it kind of is a real interesting flip on the MCU, for example. I hate to bring it up and browbeat them, but it almost feels like this is kind of what the DCEU was going for and just couldn't quite realize in action. We have a much more realistic and darker take on superheroes, but it's still colorful and it evokes so much of existing superhero lore and fiction among the big two. And because of that, when it gets brutal and when these fights end up evoking a more realistic depiction of superhero battles where buildings are shattered, people are hurt, all these things are happening, there is a lot worth talking about here. Unfortunately, there's no real way of touching it without really getting into spoilers, and that's kind of why I've been waiting a little bit. We're about 6 episodes into the 8-episode first season, and episode 6 kind of makes it pretty clear where the lines are going to be drawn around the first season if you know the comics. Even if you don't, though, I was thinking about the show, and it's like, well, it's pretty clear, things are coming to a head around Omni-Man and Invincible, all the events that have been established so far in the first season. I'm quite curious to see how it all shakes out and excited. What's also cool about it though is if you're, someone familiar with the comics or the overall plot of Invincible, the Image series, the Amazon show, because it's a television show, is often doing a lot of different things and adding in little details that make sense and are in line with what's established in the comics that really fill out the uh, logistics of the TV show, but also just kind of give it a little more. There's a difference in pacing and structure, so things are a little different in the show, and that is exciting because you never know what kind of little twists or changes they might add along the way. Robert Kirkman's very involved with this series, so it makes sense to me that uh, it the changes are appropriate to the nature of an adaptation. It almost kind of works out. I feel fans of this series might have been frustrated about like how many years they've been waiting for this relative to the early 2000s when this series first came out. However, it almost works in the favor of Invincible that Kirkman got all this experience of adaptation from The Walking Dead, and it seems like a lot of those lessons were taken to heart with Invincible because there's a real deft hand around the adaptation of this series. So, for example, early on, Invincible fights twice this villain that largely is an enemy of one of the like Teen Titans knockoff characters. I'm blanking on her name now, but Eve. She's portrayed by Gillian Jacobs, which is cool. So those fights didn't happen in the comics, and this character was actually introduced long after relative to when the stuff in the series takes place, but it just makes sense to have those fights take place when they do to sort of give episodes a little bit of closure or an introduction in another episode. And because of that, we're getting like different things and little surprises along the way, even if you're a fan of the comics and like know them like the back of your hand, which I don't, to be fair, but I feel as though even a fan who is still going to get things out of this series. So it's really cool in that regard, but also I think a pitch perfect adaptation because the Invincible comics can do stuff that the series can't, and the series can do stuff that the comics can't, and both were kind of made aware of that. We're produced aware of that fact. So the show is doing all these interesting things that the comics never could have done, and kind of shying away from some of the things that made the comic book special, because you can't replicate that. And with that, it really is a beautiful example of adaptation. Taking the best of a series, kind of adding in new things, making it fit the medium at hand. But because Invincible is so great and solid on its own and relatively unknown, it makes sense to otherwise just mostly stay true to the source material. Then you have other little details like, because this is a Robert Kirkman property, a lot of Walking Dead cast appear as voice actors in this series, including Stephen Ewan as Mark, the main character Invincible, but also a ton of secondary characters sort of throughout the series, which I really appreciate. It's a fun little detail, and it's fun to see various characters and actors turn up behind those characters. Then you also have fun things, like I said, Gillian Jacobs voicing Eve. Jason Mantzoukas voices one of the new Guardians. J.K. Simmons, who I was thinking about this, but like he's the voice. He's a voice in Legend of Korra. He's James Gordon in the DCEU, and now also J. Jonah Jameson in the MCU and the original Spider-Man movies. So this show kind of has all this baked-in street cred with the history of superhero and comic book adaptations along those lines, which I find just a lot of fun. I even noticed while I was kind of setting up the stream that Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg are producers of this show. And that kind of makes sense to me because they've been well-established comic book fans, and they're the ones who brought Preacher to life. So it's cool that their next project was basically bringing Invincible to life. They're basically just fans of all these comic books and want to give these properties a chance to exist in other media along the lines of the MCU and DCEU. And because of all that, I really hope that a lot of people check out Invincible and watch it. It's a really great show, and I just found it thoroughly entertaining from start to finish. Um, Raphael was saying a bunch of stuff before stream. Thanks for checking it out, by the way. And he was also saying that he likes this new take on superheroes. And yeah, it's very refreshing because it's got that sense of realism to it. It's not just in the violence, which is cool in and of itself, but in how these characters interact with each other. There's a certain authenticity to it all, where characters are a little more true to themselves. In the most recent episode, Mark's friend is looking for basically his boyfriend and finds him missing, and rather than call Mark, who he now knows is invincible, the dude goes into the sewer himself. So there's at a point where he already had ample evidence of foul play. So there's little things that bother me, but honestly, those are teeny tiny things. And then because what really sells me on it all is the action scenes and the way they pull stuff off. It's in the unrepentant, brutal, take no prisoners nature of this series that it really shows its strengths. And I just love it so much. I really have been enjoying going through these episodes. There's 2 more coming out, and I was actually very comfortable with kind of doing a stream for the first 6 episodes and potentially leaving a whole other stream for the last 2, because they're going to really be going places in terms of what they're all about and how they're going to end this first season. And my hope is it's getting good numbers for Amazon. It always exists in this weird little miasma of like undiscernible, unknowable viewership among Amazon and whether or not they're happy with the results. But between this and The Boys, they're doing some very interesting things with superhero content and adapting these graphic novels, which hopefully kind of gets the other companies to kind of sit upright a little bit and start looking for other properties and other comics, even beyond Image, and we went into Dark Horse and some of the other more obscure companies, and really bringing some new and cool ideas to life. Invincible is kind of old hat and even top shelf among the indie world. A lot of people will talk about that first when talking about good Image comics, and for a good reason. This show is a good example of all of that. But yeah. Chat's been a little quiet, even though we've been getting good viewers. So I guess everyone's just really interested in what I have to say, and that's cool. But I've been talking nonstop for 12 minutes, and I'm kind of running out. So unless anyone has anything else to say, I think we'll leave it at that. But thanks for watching, everybody, and we'll see you guys next time here on Comic Island. Yeah.